Here's a quick trivia question. On the animated TV show The Simpsons, who's the only character that has 5 fingers? All the rest only have 4. The answer? It's God, which of course includes Jesus, or as Homer calls him, Jeebus. There's a really clever scene at the end of one of those Simpsons episodes where Homer is walking side by side with God. They're moving away from the camera, with their backs to the camera. And Homer looks up to God and says, "Lord, can I ask you a question?" God looks down and says, "Okay, Homer, but just one." And Homer asks, "Lord, what's the meaning of life?" And as God launches into his answer, the answer that we're all longing to have, the scene fades out. On The Simpsons, God is portrayed in a very anthropomorphic way. In other words, he's given human characteristics and qualities. He has a physical body that he walks around, and he speaks in an audible voice. He even has emotions. When I was in Sunday school, one of the first and most basic things I learned about God is that he is the creator of all. In the beginning, he created everything that exists. I used to lie awake at night thinking about what that meant. I kind of trace creation all the way back to that beginning point and think about God creating in the first place. And of course, in my head, the question that came to mind is, okay, God created everything that exists, but who created God? Later on, as I grew older, I came to recognize that question completely misses the point. Because by definition, God is the one being who is uncreated, the one entity that exists outside of space and time. The problem with that question, who created God, is that it treats God, it looks at God as a character within the space-time continuum. It looks at him more like the Simpsons anthropomorphic portrayal of him than the way traditional Christian faith has defined him. When I first heard of Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, the two most prominent of the so-called new atheists, I thought that they would have devastating arguments to rip to shreds any belief in God. So when their books came out, each of their most famous books came out, I went as soon as I could get my hands on them and read them from cover to cover with intense interest. But to my great surprise, the God that they were ripping apart wasn't the God as traditional Christian faith defines him. It was actually a God that was much more like the God I imagined as a kid. They understood God as a character, a being that existed within space and time. Now, they obviously didn't believe that this God existed, but that's how they understood what Christians were saying about God, believers were saying about God. One quick example, Dawkins talks about how theists, believers, often argue that God exists based on the complexity they find in the universe. But he says if you posit belief in God based on that complexity, then you also have to posit that this God is as complex, if not immensely more so, than the created order. But in that case, according to Dawkins, then you also have to ask who created that God, who created the complexity in that God, which means you have to push back to another God who created the God who created us. And on it goes in an infinite regress. That argument sounds really sophisticated, but when you boil it down, all it is that question, who created God? A very simplistic question. See, the problem, the flaw in Dawkins and Hitchens, the essential flaw, is that they set up a straw man argument. They knock it down very effectively and justifiably so, but their whole concept of God is nothing like the Christian concept. They see God as a being that exists within the space-time continuum, but that's precisely not what Christianity says God is. God is the one who infinitely transcends the space-time continuum. In physics, the holy grail of physics is something called the grand unified theory. It's also known as the theory of everything. Physicists are looking for something that will be able to explain everything else, but in itself doesn't require explanation. That's the true, at its most basic level, understanding or definition of God that Christian faith has always held. He is the being who explains everything else, but in himself doesn't require explanation. He's the uncaused cause, the uncreated creator. Michael Guillen was, for a number of years, the ABC News science correspondent. He's a theoretical physicist who's taught at Harvard. He argues that with all the fantastic, as he calls them, theories that physicists are coming up with now for this theory of everything, from multiple universes to invisible time to dark matter, he's arguing that this much sought after theory of everything is best found in God. God is by far the simplest and most sensible explanation. In the past 40 plus years, astrophysics has actually produced all kinds of evidence which backs up his claim. And that evidence I will show you in future blogs. I'd love to hear what you have to say about this blog or any other. You can go to the Contact EJ page of this website, or you can go to the Raising Jesus Facebook page and leave your comments or questions there. Thank you.